Talking about phototherapy again, and jaundice is a pleasure. I've started my doctoral dissertation 35 years ago, and it was on phototherapy of neonatal jaundice. Well, the events of Italian research and life have shifted me to other subject matters, but I still deal with phototherapy. First off, a short introduction to explain to you what it means to use phototherapy for jaundice. Well, in general, the light has to strike bilirubin. Bilirubin as such exists in that form, double Z, bilirubin. Here it's called bilirubin. If bilirubin is struck by light, it generates isomers. I mean, it's the same molecule, but what changes is the shape. If bilirubin is rounded, it becomes more open. And the fact of opening up, the fact of changing its shape helps eliminate it. In the main, because it becomes more water-soluble per se. So it's not a matter of conjugation through the enzyme. It's a fact per se. In the main, there are two isomers. One is called configurational, the one you see on the right-hand side that is mainly present in the bile, and the structural isomer, which is present also in the urine, and it's also called illumirubin. So the configurational one is the one you see on the right-hand side, and the structural one, or lumirubin, is the one on the left-hand side. Then there's another photoproduct, i.e. a product arisen out of the fact that bilirubin has been struck by the light, and I'm referring to oxidation processes in which bilirubin is no longer an isomer. It's broken into pieces, literally. Quite obviously, you can see that curve, the white portion. Well, it absorbs light in blue and violet, and less so through to green, yellow, and red, where there is no more absorption. So if we want to do phototherapy, we have to use the range comprised of purple and green. Well, we've seen that there are two processes, configurational and structural photoisomerization, i.e. the final product is the configurational isomer, and the other isomer is the structural isomer. So we have two ways. This is a better description of the configuration of bilirubin. So it opens up, as I said. What happens is that configurational photoisomerization is quicker. It forms more easily. And then, quite obviously, there is also a reversibility process, because if the photo product takes a photon, it becomes bilirubin again. And if we leave them in a vial, after a while, we arrive at a photo balance. I mean, there are many molecules of the configurational isomer such that they can become bilirubin again. Usually in a vial, if we illuminate with purple, we arrive at around 35–40%. That's what happens. So we have a configurational photoisomerization, which is fairly quick, and a structural one that is slower. However, it's also irreversible, i.e., if it takes a photon, if lumirubin is illuminated, it doesn't go back to bilirubin, which is fairly important. What happens is that, quite obviously, the vast majority of data in the literature is about newborns, because there are many newborns, and luckily enough, there are few newborns with Crigler-Najjar. With respect to the newborns, what happens is that the photoisomer has a slow excretion. It forms a lot, but in the blood we find concentrations which can be compared to those we can find in a vial. Whereas the structural isomer is easily present in the urine, very little present in the blood, because it is easily eliminated, and so you don't find it so commonly in blood. So to summarize a bit, we can see that photoisomerization, the configurational one, i.e. the slower process, the speaker corrects himself, the quicker one, which is eliminated more slowly, depends upon the wavelength. Its formation depends on the wavelength. So in general, in the purple, there's more, and in green, there's less. And the opposite is true for structural isomerization. Less in purple, and increasingly more towards green. But this depends upon the absorbed photons, because if we take a look at this slide and the absorption spectrum, what happens is that the absorption in green is much less. So the process is fairly complex, i.e., to form more lumirubin, we should go to the green, but we should also give more photons in order to have the same amount as in the purple. The situation is fairly complex, and even more so because we are not thinking of a vial. We are thinking of bilirubin in a person with jaundice, where the skin is yellow and where bilirubin has also reached the dermis and the basal layers and is visible on the scleras and the skin. So the light should go deep. And we also have to consider light transmission through the skin. We know very well, and we see, that the light penetrates much better in red than in purple. So let's see if I can turn on the torch of my mobile phone. So what happens is that if I put the fingers on it, the color is red. The color is red because the photons that pass are the ones in the red. Because there is an optical window, as they say, in the red, where diagnostic tests are done, because we can do this with the light. And you know that there are also bilirubin measurers which are transcutaneous. You measure bilirubin through the light, and you use photons as a probe. So you have to bear in mind that I have to form configurational and structural photoisomers, and I also have to bear in mind light transmission. The studies done on newborns, including based upon theoretical models that have been demonstrated in reality, considering that newborns per se eliminate isomers, structural isomers more easily, what happens is that the ideal light, and by the way, this is a cross-section of the skin of the newborn, close to the wavelengths where there is the highest amount of bilirubin. And as you can see, the transmission increases as we get to 500, i.e. the green area goes up a lot. But what happens is that the highest efficiency on newborns is around 480 nanometers, i.e. turquoise. And Osram has made a turquoise-colored lamp based upon a patent of our team. We've given it for free. So what happens is that Osram makes this lamp, but since it's a cost, it doesn't sell it. This is what we were talking about. The problem is also that they make it, but since more often than not, in neonatal wards, they use bluish lamps, what happens is they don't buy it because the turquoise one costs more. The other one costs 18 euros only. I mean, at the end of the day, phototherapy can last 24 or 48 hours, but I mean, it's not a life-changing game. So that's why the turquoise lamp is not used. But now we have new light sources. You know very well that in practice, the classical lamps, except halogen ones, are out of the market. This has helped a lot, the price decrease and the development of technology. I always say that I graduated working on lasers. I still work with and on lasers because mostly phototherapies are done with lasers, but the prices have gone down after CD-ROMs, i.e. when lots and lots are made. So now the LED prices are collapsing because LED is now used all the time. It's used for backlighting in TV sets. So the development of LEDs for the coming future will be huge. If you take a look at this slide, and if you take a look at the green chart, you can see that there's a curve that grows rapidly from the year 2000 onwards, i.e. lighting LEDs. And it says lumens per watts, i.e. visible photons emitted per watt, i.e. per power paid to the utility. So there's a huge development of the efficiency and technology of LEDs. If you take a look at the bottom chart on the left-hand side of the slide, and I tell you because it's not visible, that 131 at the bottom on the left-hand side of the blue chart refers to the year 2006. So in 2006, there was a lab efficiency of the main player of 131 lumens per watt. Do you know how many lumens per watt are present in a commercial lamp? Well, between 80 and 100. So it means that in 2006 in the lab, we were doing much better as compared to the currently available products on the market now. Now in the same lab, we stand at 300 lumens per watt, 3 times less with respect to common products available in the market for many reasons, because lab objects are fairly peculiar, amongst other things. But this is just to tell you that in the lab, we've already reached these levels. But where's the limit? The limit is 800. Above 800, in theory, we won't get. But this means that as compared to now, we will have LEDs which will be 8 times more powerful and which will consume 8 times less than the currently marketed ones. with the amount of light being the same. Which are the pros of LEDs? Well, there are so many, quite obviously. Efficiency. LEDs emit more light per watt consumed. The colors, there are so many. In the bilirubin absorption area, we have 455, 460, 470. If you take a look at fluorescent lamps, there's one at 420, there's one at 440, there's one at 460, and then, usually there are some above 500, but there's the turquoise one that is made by Osram, which is not sold currently, which stands around 480, 490. And then the size. Well, the LEDs can be as small as you want. The smaller, the more efficient they are. The problem is to make big LEDs, which are more powerful. Usually big and powerful LEDs are made as matrices, i.e. a bunch of smaller LEDs put together. You can also dim LEDs. You can't do that with a fluorescent lamp. With LEDs, you just have to have the right electronics, and you can increase or decrease the intensity of light. The light is cold, but that is true for fluorescent lights as well. Generally, only the Chinese one burn because they glue them with silicon, which is not a thermal conductor. They're very sensitive to temperature. And the life of LEDs is up to 50,000 hours. A friend of mine told me that there is a reference center in Turin, the Italian Meteorological Institute, that carries out tests on the life of objects, and that friend said, well, I have a LED that is working and has been working for 40 years. Now I'm going to use a hammer to break it. And then LEDs are so strong, you can put them on the ground, they will continue to work, but the electronic components of LEDs can break. They're not toxic. They could also be eaten, in theory. There are polymers which are biodegradable, and they're very directional. So while fluorescent lamps emit everywhere, you need a reflector. With an LED, well, the light can be more or less directional, as you wish. As for the cons, well, the price. For the time being, they're not very price competitive unless you have a very long time horizon. They are strongly dependent upon the temperature, and so if somehow you don't allow them to dissipate the heat that is emitted through systems on the back, and if you don't cool them down, since they are very thin silicon layers, well, it tends to melt. But those made by very good players don't have these problems. One of the cons is that there is no standard for making LEDs. They can be made in several manners. So while previously we had the classic lamp with the classic shape, now lamps of that type are made so that it's going to be easier to replace the old classic lamps. But, the world will easily forget the old classical lamps. So, at the end of the day, we don't know exactly what standard to use. Everything will have to be changed. There are illuminators with many low-power LEDs. So, systems like this are used for neonatal jaundice. But there are also systems with high-power LEDs. So you can do pretty much everything. They can also be very small and thin, and put on flexible panels like the ones you see on your right-hand side, which can cover the whole newborn. I mean, the surface can also be as large as one for an adult. But again, they have to have a flexible support device. So in that case, if we wanted to make an LED garment, it wouldn't be so easy, including because it's not breathable. So it's better to use optical fibers and make a fabric out of it with very thin filaments conveying light like fibers. Making garments is not so easy with LEDs. As I said, with LEDs, you can do pretty much everything. I mean, what happens is that you can design pieces of equipment which can vary their emission color, i.e. the light spectrum emitted. So it's easy to do something that can change the color during phototherapy. Can be done based upon the skin pigmentation. So in theory, you can see what the skin pigmentation is. Because, I mean, think of the cost of the camera in my mobile phone. I don't know if you've seen it. I mean, 5 megapixels of camera can cost 15 euros, maybe even less than that. So what happens is that, in theory at least, we really think of objects which read the skin and change the color as a result of that, including based upon the age and growth of the person. Should this be an added value? Because in point of fact, what happens and what we've seen is that in general, in newborns, it is the structural isomer that is eliminated. But after some months of life, the excretion of the configurational isomer becomes higher. So much so that phototherapy in kids with Crigler-Najjar is thought for the configurational isomer. However, what happens is that with aging, the skin becomes less and less transparent in blue. And so, what unfortunately is missing in the literature is an accurate study on kids and adults with the Crigler-Najjar syndrome and what happens. I mean, how much configurational isomer is there in the serum? I mean, that's easier to understand, but how much structural isomer is present in the urine of an adult? Well, we don't know. There is no data in the literature about that. So, I mean, it's just an assumption. But logically, knowing this, one could have a bespoke lamp. Now it's possible, it's doable. Previously, we only had 3 lamps, and that was all. Now we can do pretty much everything, because with the advent of LEDs, we can use many LEDs on a platform and only activate the ones we want to have the color we want. Not only that, though, but now the technology of other systems, including organic polymers and electro-luminescent ones, well, they're very widespread. If you have a 400 euro mobile phone in your pocket or an ultra-thin TV set, like the Ultra HD curve screen TV sets, they are based on OLEDs, i.e. extremely thin polymers, which are foldable and which can be illuminated. They're extremely thin, they're flexible, and probably they're the future, not just for home use, but for all other uses of lighting. for the time being, they're extremely expensive. I mean, they can only be used for applications in which they really make the difference. Because, I mean, if you think of a TV set in general is one with liquid crystals and LED backlighted. It's like looking at an X-ray sheet behind a panel of a TV set. With the OLEDs, every pixel emits its color, and it's an extremely thin sheet. If you take a look at these TV sets, well, their thickness can be even less than 1 centimeter. They can also be transparent. And Osram already makes windows for Northern Europe. I don't know if you've noticed that in Northern Europe, they want the light coming from the window. So they're extremely versatile from this point of view. And they're also used for therapeutic purposes. And so these objects are extremely flexible, as I said. But the problem is that for the time being, they're still very costly to be made, and their efficiency is lower than fluorescent lamps. So the efficiency is lower than LEDs. So large batteries are required, because with the other systems, instead, we have the possibility of having LED illuminators with smaller lithium batteries, which are lightweight and portable and, I mean, little, not very large. What's next? What will be the future? Because, I mean, OLED, we already have it in our pocket. It's only a matter of decreasing costs and boosting efficiency. But what's next? Well, electro-luminescent varnishes, for example. If you take a look at OLEDs, these are several layers. But in the main, there are electrodes which, if they are made with titanium oxide, this electrode becomes a transparent conducting metal. You can paint a wall with a metal, an electrode, it's transparent. You put on the polymer with the photons, you paint it again with another transparent metallic electrode. You attach a battery between the layer on the wall and the last layer, and the light is on. That's what you see here. I mean, you can make garments. And in the US, they already use it for motorbikes and cars. Someone has already used this method for garments. I mean, it's a future that is already been marketed. And then, well, you can use your fancy and think even of a pill for phototherapy. This is an object that will be marketed in 3 years' time, probably, for the treatment of Helicobacter pylori, because the Helicobacter pylori that causes ulcers is photosensitive. And so some thought of developing a capsule that works with light for 20 minutes in the stomach. It kills the bacterium, and then it turns off, goes to the intestine, and is washed out. Well, you can't do phototherapy with such an object because it can only emit few photons. But I mean, it might not be completely undoable. Thank you.
Any questions? So you mentioned an LED object lasting 50,000 hours. I know that there is a company selling LED lamps for phototherapy, and the life span is 5,000 hours. So my question is the following: why LEDs deteriorate so much? Well, to me, 5,000 hours is really such a small number, and maybe the company thought of forensic medicine issue, because I mean, if your lamp in the house decreases the power by 20 or 30%, you don't even notice it. Okay, so this is why we talk about 50,000 hours. But if you experience a 5% decrease in the phototherapy, then the phototherapy is reduced in terms of milligrams of bilirubin. So that I think the issue is different here. So it's like forensic medicine. So you cannot sell an object unless you state this lifespan of the object. So before the next question, I have to tell you that Doctors Dantiga and Koledan have to leave. So so we have a question from Johnny, who is the father of a 1 year and 2 months child with Crigler-Najjar syndrome, and he has a few questions. So the first one is the following: in terms of gene therapy, so it is better to wait for the gene therapy rather than having a transplantation? Or secondly, in terms of administration, what is the duration of the administration, and also is immunosuppressive therapy necessary after the introduction of the virus? So this is a question for Federico. The child is 1 year and 2 months. So actually, the first part of the questions will be answered by clinicians, because we start with older patients. In terms of administration, it is an intravenous injection lasting 1 hour, more or less, 200 milliliters, so quite a standard dose. No immunosuppressive drugs will be administered before, so only whether needed. But for the other part of the questions, I would like to give the floor to my colleague. So in terms of transplantation, he's also asking what would be the better type of liver transplantation, and also if the immunosuppressive therapy has to last for the whole life of the patient. So in terms of choice, so waiting for gene therapy or not, I will focus on this part of the question. I think we are so close to the clinical trial that any patient who is not in danger should wait for the results of the clinical trial, because it is about to start. So no children under 10 years are enrolled. However, child of 1 year and 2 months can have the jaundice under control. So I think that given the young age, my personal suggestion would be following phototherapy, controlling bilirubin levels, and waiting for the results of the clinical trial. In terms of type of transplantation, we had 14 months baby, so like 10 kilos of weight, more or less. So full liver is quite unlikely to be found. And the liver of a young donor, maybe if you have a donor who is like 12, 13, 14 kilos, it would be okay. But I think that the most likely solution is that a portion of liver will be transplanted. So whether it will be a split liver or not depends on the country where it comes from. The other option we mentioned, so the APOLT, would create problems because we should remove the left portion, and if the donor is the parent, the left portion of the donor would be too big, too large. However, I have to say that I have no direct experience on that, so I cannot tell you much more. In case of total, in case of solid organ transplantation, in terms of therapy, you have to think that it will last for the whole life. Well, you could interrupt it, but at the moment, we cannot tell you. So if I got it right, ideal phototherapy is not only the one with blue light. So we could also have changes in color in order to be more effective. So did I get it right? Well, the problem is quite complex, and it most likely depends on individual processes, because we do not know exactly we do not know exactly how much the relative percentage of the two isomers that are eliminated. So we do not know the extent, but we know that this happens. And the other issue is that light transfer, light transmission through the skin changes with age and pigmentation. So, for example, 35 years ago, we did not have the same instruments we have today, but in newborn babies, we could find out what the mom breastfeeding the newborn baby had eaten with the technologies of that time. So melanin is one of the main screens in skin. So if we maintain the same wavelength of blue, for example, and we are in summer, and we know that there is more melanin in our skin, So bilirubin photons are reduced because we have the melanin screen here. So it would be reasonable to move to the green light because transmission is increased. Maybe isomer production is decreased a bit, but the structural one increases. So, however, we do not know exactly because we do not have evidence about Crigler-Najjar syndrome, but we do not know to what extent we have to change, the color. So, if I got it right, the blue light will remain the standard because, yes, but the problem here is that in case of high concentrations of pigments in the skin, such as in case of melanin, we have to change wavelength in order to maximize the results. And the lamps that you use, unfortunately, are never the ideal or optimal ones. I have another question. Do you have any information about side effects of light on the skin? Well, generally speaking, in literature, we have papers about side effects, but the threshold is 550. So under 550, there might be some problems, but beyond this threshold, no side effects. In terms of distance from the skin, any more information? Well, the problem is not the distance from the skin, but what we should measure is the amount of light reaching the skin, which is usually measured in milliwatt by squared centimeter. So you should use a meter, an instrument, to measure the milliwatt per square centimeter on the skin of the baby. On newborn babies, we know that if we have between 3 and 4 milliwatt per square centimeter, we know that it is effective, so it is good. And however, we think this should increase with age, because if we have a newborn baby and an adult, of course we have to consider the surface to volume ratio. It's like, having a sphere, a ball. So if you have a ball and the surface increases, we have, of course, the surface and the volume. So if the sphere or the ball increases, it's like, the orange, where if you have a larger one, the skin is lower. So in an adult, you have to consider the surface to volume ratio. So in this case, you have to use more photons. So if for a newborn baby, 3-4 milliwatt per square centimeter is okay, in the adult, we have to use a higher amount. I would like to know something about the Osram lamps using green light. So I did not understand whether they are effective, but they are expensive or not. Well, I was referring to newborn babies because these lamps are twice effective as blue light lamps, and in case of physiological hyperbilirubinemia, they are used. But in case of Crigler-Najjar syndrome, this is okay for the first 5-6 months, but afterwards it is better to use blue or purple light. So the Philips 52 is okay. The turquoise is 4 times more expensive than the other lamps because not so many are produced, so it is not a matter of cost of the technology. But for the Crigler-Najjar syndrome, well, that would be useful only for a certain time. But I remember that when she was 5-6 years old, we tried green light lamps by Philips, but they were not effective at all. Well, the problem is that the ones having first of all, the ones having green light are not effective, but the ones having like turquoise light, so like blue-green light, are effective when it comes to bilirubin, and this is what is effective in newborn babies. But when it comes to Crigler-Najjar, we have to focus on configuration of one. But the structural isomer, when it comes to the tests carried out on patients, and based on what some researchers said, is that the structural isomer is found in the urines, but this is not what matters because fortunately we are able to eliminate the configuration of one. I have a question because I have a lamp by Philips TL52, and I also use LEDs, so I use mixed light. So both the one I receive from the health agency and also the LEDs. I use LEDs at the same distance, but my question is this correct or not? Well, the only way to know is to measure the watt per square centimeter reaching the surface of the skin. So this is the only way you can measure it. Because this kind of measuring instruments can be easily found. So you could, for example, go to a research lab working on light, and you can calibrate cheaper measuring instruments and use them because, well, of course, the official ones may cost 300, 400 euros, but you may calibrate cheaper ones and then keeping the cheaper ones to measure it, because you should monitor the number of watt per square centimeter reaching the skin of the baby or the adult patient. So Lux Meter would be effective. Well, this instrument measures the lux, and the lux is the light seen by the eye. So, for example, if I have 100 photons in the purple, the Lux Meter would see nothing. But if I have 100 in the yellow, the same instrument would give me 100. So this is not useful. So what kind of instrument? Well, these are photodiodes measuring the watt per square centimeters. Unfortunately, the bulbs you can buy, they have features in terms of lux lumen, so the photons visible by human eyes. Because this is the way, we give features about the bulbs. But actually, in our case, we should control or measure the photons, but even better, the watts per square centimeter. So based on that, what shall we do? Well, okay, we know the watt per square centimeter. Then after that, if you have, for example, an LED emitting a specific number of watts, then you have to look at the surface and divide it by the square centimeters of the surface illuminated by the LED. Okay, so you should have this formula. But going back to the wavelengths, colors, frequencies. So since you can do that with LEDs, we can use different frequencies or wavelengths. So we could use the green, purple, or blue and create a wall with LEDs changing frequency overnight, for example. No, this wouldn't be helpful because generally speaking, today, for example, we have a person having a specific melanin, specific age. So for this person, we have the ideal wavelength for the phototherapy. But the same person in summer has an increased amount of melanin, so we should shift the wavelength to the green. So the idea would be to have a panel with 2 or 3 LEDs, so one at 450, one at 455, and one at 460, for example, or 465. So depending on the skin pigmentation or transparency, and we can measure it through a specific instrument, then we switch on a specific LED on a specific day. Okay? Because depending on the specific situation, a specific LED is suitable. But measuring the values is not possible. Unfortunately, we know that the picture is this, we know that the situation is this, but we do not know exactly because we should take blood samples or urines and checking the current situation. So this is why I was saying if I have like dark green, light green, blue and purple during the night, changing the colors, no, that would be wrong, because if you have, for example, 4 LEDs, one is the ideal one and the other are not ideal. So if you switch on the other ones, then the result won't be effective. So I'm not saying it is all or nothing. So I'm not telling you that today 450 is effective, whereas 460 is not. So either you know that the 460 works today, otherwise, you could use more green lights in summer and more purple lights in winter, unless you have the possibility to have a remote sensor lighting up the skin and looking at the information and then switching on the right LED, which theoretically is possible, but unfortunately it hasn't been done yet. So my question is, are you studying the LED peel? Well, we have a patent pending for the treatment of the Helicobacter pylori. So I'm now studying phototherapy, antibacterial phototherapy, because unfortunately a lot of patients are now resistant to antibiotics. So we are looking for alternative ways to treat infections or diseases. We are still in the experimentation phase on animals. We will be ready to sell it in 3 years' time. Unfortunately, there is not enough literature because it's a rare disease. You said, so there is another question. You said that for specific levels of light, you may have damage to the skin. And you said levels under 450. Well, no, I was talking about colors. So the purple light, so very close to ultraviolet, which is absorbed by molecules such as amino acids, proteins. So biological material, which is useful for cellular metabolism. So the more we use green, turquoise light, and the fewer of these products needed in cellular metabolism are encountered. So in literature, for example, we have a number of studies by Rex Tira, scholar, talking about damage by ultraviolet and purple, but over 450 we do not have evidence about damage, so only on the retina. So when it comes to blue, green and turquoise wavelengths or pigments, so there are no problems, because of course for a damage to occur we need a target, so something absorbing light, and in these wavelengths, so green or blue or turquoise, we do not have important targets, okay? So this is the explanation. So, we know the problem of melanomas, but for example, with the phototherapy, well, I've never read anything about melanomas, so nothing. So if I use blue-green light, because the melanin in the skin has increased, I also have to increase the intensity of the LED. Because the bilirubin absorption peak remains always the same in the blue, right? You are right. So let me better explain what I said. If I maintain 450, melanin increases and I receive fewer photons, so I can increase the intensity of light. So the 20% which is lost due to melanin absorption is increased nonetheless. So I have the same lamp, but I can increase the intensity. Or I shift a bit towards the green, but of course I have to increase intensity as well, and this is correct. So I shift to the green, I increase intensity, but not as much as I had to do if I remain in the purple light, which is correct. If the if you consider the tests we have performed on Crigler-Najjar syndrome patients, well, we can say that at the end of the phototherapy, the concentration in the serum are like the ones we would have in the vial. So if we have a lower concentration, it means that we used less light. So it would have been better to use more light, because I have to form the isomer, and I can see it in the serum, but then from the serum it has to go to the urines, because otherwise it goes back to bilirubin. So unfortunately we do not have instruments, so I should need a bilirubin measuring tool to see the concentration of bilirubin in the serum, and so in this way I could have the information of whether the right amount or intensity of light has been used, but we do not have this data available. So this is the ideal situation, but we cannot do that. However, what you said is correct. Generally speaking, for the structural isomer, this situation is not valid. So if we use a lot of photons, well, that would be great. And so if you go to the green light and you increase the intensity, this is perfect. Also because part of the light goes to an increase in temperature, okay?